Welcome everyone for tuning in with us for the Eliminate Hate panel, Model Minority Myth on Film at the 24th Annual Vancouver Asian Film Festival. I'm Barbara Lee, founder and president of the festival. We begin by acknowledging that this broadcast is taking place on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. This panel series is sponsored by Creative BC, Telefilm Canada, Canadian Heritage, and TELUS Story Hive. Eliminate Hate was launched in April in response to the rise of anti-Asian racist attacks and is a campaign to transform negative acts into positive calls to action and increase representation in film, television, and all media. There will be ongoing events after this festival, which I will speak to at the end of this panel. So first, let's begin, and I'd like to introduce our moderator, Sue-Ann Yao. Sue-Ann was awarded a PhD in Media and Communications from Goldsmith University of London in 2016. Currently based in Vancouver, she is a sessional instructor at Emily Carr University of Art and Design and a faculty associate with the Hong Kong Studies Initiative at the University of British Columbia. Her research and writing about film festivals, Hong Kong cinema, and Asian Canadian screen cultures, among other topics, can be found in a range of scholarly and general interest publications. Alongside her academic research, Sue-Ann also works independently as a screen curator and programming, and was director of programming at VAF from 2005 to 2006. Welcome, Sue-Ann. And Sue-Ann is here to introduce the panel, and we are very much an international and Canadian panel to speak about this topic today. So I will leave it up to you, and welcome back, Sue-Ann.
Thank you very much, Barb, and welcome everybody to the panel today on the Model Minority Myth on Film. I want to thank the audience very much for joining us on a beautiful sunny day on the West Coast. I want to thank the filmmakers who I will introduce shortly. And I want to thank the Vancouver Asian Film Festival very much for organizing today's panel. But before I talk more about how the session today is going to run, it's important that I acknowledge again that Vancouver is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish nations, specifically the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. And as unceded guests, uninvited guests, it is our responsibility to build a new relationship with Indigenous people that respects their rights and that honors their stewardship of the land. So I want to express that gratitude very clearly at the beginning. So for today's panel, what I'm going to do is to introduce the filmmakers shortly. We have three filmmakers representing two films joining us today. We are talking about the model minority myth. There's a lot that can be said about this topic, but just to make sure that we are all on the same page and have a common basis of understanding for today, we're going to show you a short 4-minute clip called the Model Minority Trope Explained. Following on from that, we're going to hear from each of the panelists and the panel overall. And finally, you will have a chance to ask your questions to individual filmmakers or to the panel, or to comment on the topic that we have before us. So please do stay to the end of the session and make your comments and questions known. Okay, so what I want to do first is to introduce the director, writer, and producer of the feature narrative film Stealing School. This is Lee Dong. Lee Dong is an award-winning director and writer currently living and working in Toronto. Lee graduated from Dalhousie University in 2006 with honors in English and history, and then went on to graduate from Dalhousie Law School. After law school, Lee played poker professionally before he was hand-selected by Oscar-nominated director Werner Herzog to attend his Rogue Film School in 2010. Lee has since gone on to write and direct numerous shorts, documentaries, and music videos. His first feature film, Stealing School, was released in Canada by Game Theory Films in June of 2020. Do we have Lee here?
I'm here. Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Nice to see you. Thank you. Thank you for that warm introduction.
I will introduce the two other filmmakers, and then we'll come back and hear more about you in the film.
No problem.
The next filmmaker that I want to introduce is Kelly Ning. She is the director and producer of the feature documentary film Curtain Up. Kelly is a multimedia journalist from Singapore, drawn particularly to stories on minority communities, education, and mental health. Her video and written stories have been published on The Atlantic, NBC, and South China Morning Post, among others. She spent 5 years as a staff reporter at Singapore's second most read newspaper, Today, covering immigration, crime, law, and health. Curtain Up is her filmmaking debut. Kelly is currently a correspondent at Singapore's The Business Times. Welcome, Kelly.
Thanks, Lynn. Hi, everyone. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks. And last but certainly not least, we have another filmmaker associated with the documentary Curtain Up. That's Hui Tong. Hui is a documentary filmmaker and freelance writer from Beijing. 5 years ago, he came to the US for college and developed a strong interest in the intersection of history, arts, culture, and identity. He has been making narrative and documentary shorts since high school, and in writing form covered Asian American identity issues. Curtain Up is his first feature-length documentary. Hui is currently working on his first book on issues of identity through the lens of Asian American, Chinese American, mainland Chinese, and overseas Chinese students. Welcome, Hui.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here.
Okay, it's great to have such an accomplished panel of filmmakers today. I want to congratulate you very much on your films and on your screening here at VAF. We all want to hear more about your projects and how they relate to this topic. But before we get into the discussion, I want to show you a clip about the model minority trope, excuse me, and we will talk to the filmmakers following that clip. Oh, okay, I've just got a note to let the audience know that Li Dong is joining us today from Toronto. Kelly is joining us from Singapore. Hui is joining us from Beijing. So people have made a lot of effort to be here. We appreciate their participation very much. It is 6 a.m. In Asia right now. And Lee, we're very glad that you're here on Toronto time too. Okay, so if you'll bear with us for a minute, we're going to show you this clip.
I thought you Asian girls were supposed to be smart.
The smart Asian might be the most common identifier of the model minority, often found in a high school setting. Asian nerds. They're seen as classic nerds, blessed with high IQs, good with math, and coming off like walking textbooks.
I've just read a recent behavioral study in Psychology Today, which found that its subjects were more motivated to specific action by the fear of loss in the hope of gain.
They're often portrayed as stiff and socially awkward. The Big Bang Theory's Raj may be a brilliant astrophysicist, yet a running gag on the show is that he can't even speak to a woman without the aid of alcohol.
She asked me a question. I should probably nod.
The model minority is also driven and self-reliant.
I'm a Mr. Kim and this is my store. I working very hard every day.
This is common especially to first-generation Asian Americans, the self-made immigrant who values hard work above all else.
But you, working for Kim and Future, like a Korean people.
And for the parents in Fresh Off the Boat, hard work gives them the kind of status and security they associate with being white.
If we get separated, try and join a white family. You will be safe there until I can find you.
Usually, the model minority's ambition and intelligence leads them to pursue STEM careers in medicine or engineering.
I'm the only one of these clowns that can code in Java, and I write sleek, performant, low-overhead Scala code with higher-order functions that will run on anything.
They not only take competitive pride in their work, they obsess over the wealth and social station it provides.
I used to be the Tesla guy in the office. I don't want to sound selfish, but sometimes I wish only I made money, you know?
But despite being professionally and academically competitive, the model minority is also seen as exceedingly polite and submissive.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Hello, my name is Elena Kurama. I was born with gills like fish.
Pitch Perfect's Lily is so meek that her voice barely rises above a mumble.
I think I have something that can help us out.
Excuse me, bitch. You don't need to shout.
The Office's Hidetoshi, a former heart surgeon in Japan, is happy just to have his humble warehouse job.
Now I have house, American car, and you.
Even at their most genuinely combative, the model minority is still viewed as adorably harmless.
Make me look good out there. We're not you sons of bitches. You no good sons of bitches.
They never pose any real threat to the white status quo, which allows them to be relegated to tertiary supporting roles like the fleeting love interest.
Everyone, this is Julie.
The best friend sidekick.
Science project.
Yes.
For school.
Yes, Mama.
You're not dating.
No, Mama.
Okay. Follow me.
Or the wise, benevolent guru.
You're always there when I need you, Tran. Thank you. I'm glad you got my life.
Above all, the model minority is presented as wanting nothing more than to get along and integrate seamlessly into American society. They're seen as virtuous and admirable, but most importantly, in a way that doesn't challenge the racial hierarchy.
I ain't worried, because by and large, Asians are very dependable. You know, they don't want no trouble.
In jiu-jitsu, it's important to focus on what's in front of you. That's why we love the Rogue's heads-up display. The all-new Rogue. Redesigned, redefined.
Okay. Thank you very much for showing us that clip as a way of framing today. Without further ado, I want to now go to each of the filmmakers and ask them about their particular film projects. So if I can start with Lee.
Yeah. Hi.
Are you back with us?
Yes,
Hi, Lee.
I am. Hi.
Hi. So to kick off the panel discussion part, I'm wondering if you can talk about why you made Stealing School, and also for the benefit of the audience, if you can share a little bit about what the film is about.
I guess I made Stealing School because it was something that the format of the movie. It's about a girl who's in university and she's a computer science student, and right before she's about to graduate, she gets dragged into an academic tribunal for plagiarism. And so the whole movie is essentially shot in one room that operates as a sort of courtroom to determine her guilt. So I made it because it was a format that was easy to shoot, and it was only one room and minimal locations, and I was allowed to talk about a lot of the things that interested me, that included, themes of race and the importance of school and gender and various issues that I found interesting to talk about.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll come back to you after we talk to Kelly. So Kelly, are you here?
Hi.
Hi. So Curtain Up, can you tell us why you made the film and also what it's about?
Okay. Maybe I can start with what it's about, and then Hui can talk more about why we made it. So Curtain Up is a documentary film set in New York City's Chinatown. And we followed a bunch of elementary school children doing theater. So the film follows them through their production of Frozen. So that's Disney's Frozen, but adapted for kids. And we looked at how offstage, behind the scenes, some of the cultural expectations and familiar tensions that they had to deal with, and how these kids then started to think more about their ethnic and cultural identities through putting up the play.
Great. Thank you very much for that overview. And Hui, are you there?
Yeah, here I am.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you talk more about Curtain Up and why you made it?
Sure. Yeah, I think Kelly made a good summary of the story, and for me, it's basically it's summer 2018. Kelly and I were actually classmates at the Columbia Journalism School, and we were supposed to do a lot of reporting and research for in preparation for our documentary project. And that was time of Crazy Rich Asians just coming out, and there's all this talk and discussion about representation in film. But also, Crazy Rich Asians brought a lot of disputes among the Asian American communities. I think first of all, it was because it was Crazy Rich Asians tell the story about Chinese or overseas rich Chinese communities, but that doesn't really represent all the diversity within the Asian American community. So there are a lot of people arguing against the representation power of such a film, right? I was a theater enthusiast in college, so I went on to do some more research and reporting on the theater community, right? And trying to look at how Asian and Asian American people were represented in the theater scene. And I found out, first of all, I think number-wise, there's definitely a lack of representation in theater scene, but also how are the people represented is also a dispute in theater scene, because some people might think oh, we need to do mainstream Western show to represent ourselves, or some people think, oh, we need to tell Asian stories, not trying to cater to the mainstream white audiences. So among all these disputes, I think it might be interesting to further explore this topic. And then basically I found this organization called National Asian Artists Project, and they had this theater club in the New York Chinatown with all the kids doing Disney shows. So basically all Asian kids doing Disney or American iconic American shows. So that's kind of an interesting tension happening there. So that's why I started filming the project, and Kelly joined me a couple of weeks later. So
okay, great. Thank you very much. That's very insightful. I will maybe direct this at all three of you to just jump in. Even though your films are very different, narrative and documentary and sort of a university setting versus elementary school kids, they're both set in educational institutions. What kinds of issues do you think being in that kind of a context raises in terms of Asian, in terms of when you place Asian characters in that kind of an institution? How does that change the issues that you might want to address?
I mean, you guys started with the kids. Why don't you guys go first, man?
All right, I'll get started, I guess. I think what's special about this school where we filmed our documentary was it's over 95% Asian. It's very Asian dominant school, and a lot of the feedback from the audiences after watching our film was they couldn't imagine there's still a school of all Asian kids in New York. I think that tells both kind of what's special about New York City, that New York City has always been having these ethnic communities, right? And people like to stay in the communities and have Jews in their cultural background. But also, what's interesting is that a lot of parents actually send their kids. They don't actually live in Chinatown or even near Chinatown. They live like, some of the parents are like bankers or like financial person or engineers, but they send their kids down to the Chinatown to attend the school like this because they want their children to like stay Chinese or stay Asian when they're young. So I guess that's a very special school. That's why we also chose this school. And I guess that might be a little bit different from, a general school where, Asian kids are definitely the minority. Yeah.
Right.
I set my movie in a school because I don't know about you guys, but when I was raised by my Chinese mom, obviously, she there's a suggestion when you're growing up that the better you do at school, the more successful you'll be in life. And then that's something that you believe in as a kid because you're stupid. And then as you grow up, you realize that that's not really true. And I learned that personally around university when I realized there was no correlation between how good you did in school and how successful you are in life. It's kind of random and unfair. And I remember being very upset learning this and basically being lied to by my parents. So yeah, so I think that's why I set my movie in a school and my Asian character in a school. I think the protagonist also sort of discovers the same thing, and she equally becomes as upset with the world as I did. So, yeah.
Okay, Kelly, do you have anything to add about the importance of education to these two particular stories and the setting?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think like PS 124, the school that Curtain Up is set in, it's, as we mentioned, like a very unique school in that sense, not just because it's majority Asian, which is unusual in the States and in New York City, but also I guess like the focus and the amount of effort that they kind of put like to the arts, which I think is kind of like a antithesis to this whole thing about Asians being underrepresented in media, in theater, on Broadway. So I think that's what kind of like makes it special in a way, but also maybe a model, so to speak, that maybe other schools might want to emulate a little bit. And I think we kind of tried to explore a transitional story line from when some of these fifth graders transitioned from being in this majority Asian elementary school to a middle school that's like more diverse. Although I guess it wasn't like fully brought out, but I guess that was one of the things that we wanted to look at, because it's a very real issue that they were facing, because like they grew up their formative years of education being in a school where most people looked like them and like their family members, but then they were like going into an environment where they ethnically become like the minority, and what sort of like is that challenging for some of them. So that I guess was kind of an issue that we wanted to explore as well, and I think being in this context allowed us to kind of like touch on it.
Okay. So I guess I have a question for you, and then I'll go back to Lee. Do you think that the fact that this was a special school and that it was for Asian kids with a kind of community, a very particular community, made the model minority myth less relevant to the kids, less pressing, and were they able to pursue theater and the arts and to do something a little different because of that uniqueness of the context?
So I think it's they were given the platform to perform, to join actually really reputable theater club where they went on to also like perform at this international kids theater festivals and things like that. But I feel like it probably differs from kid to kid, but like quite a few of them, as I guess we see in our film, were also confronted with the expectations of being this model minority in their homes.
Yes.
And perhaps to some extent it reinforces one another. You see like William's mom, Jenny, telling her son that it's all her expectations of her son is that he should do well in school and, you know, like get a respectable job and, you know, maybe not want to meddle so much professionally with the arts and things like that, but, you know, it's more the safer route is to, you know, maybe be an engineer or a doctor. So that's actually pretty, I would say, befitting of the model minority myth.
Yes.
And we see similar stories like that too, like in some of the other children. So I do think that I don't think that it makes it less relevant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, because of the family influence, not just the societal context, but
right. And I guess it's an interplay of both, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, great. You mentioned William, and I want to come back to particular characters in a second because they were so memorable. And of course, it's a documentary, so they're based on real people, and there is a distinction to be made there between the two of your projects. But Lee, going back to Stealing School, and since we're talking about particular individuals, I guess the protagonist of your film, and it's fictional, is a woman called April, student called April, and she's a very interesting character. I think I appreciated both of your projects for very different reasons. They're very different films. April is interesting, and I think your film is interesting because there are no heroes. That's my interpretation. Other people may differ on that. And to embark. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you keep saying interesting. You can just call her a bad person. Like, I'm not going to be offended. It's fine. Like, she's not a good person. She's not. She's the main character of the movie, but you know, like the person who made her, they're a terrible person on the inside. So you can just show, if you can just show that from the beginning of the story, then you can sort of shake an audience's expectation, at least a Western audience's expectation from the beginning. By the way, I do want to say something about Curtain Up, which I did not see, but I did see the trailer, and it was very heartening for me to see the little kids in theater school and singing and performing and whatnot. It was very touching, even if it was unrealistic. And I was like, man, I wish I got to go to like performance school when I was a kid. There's no way in hell my mom would have sent me there. But good for those kids is what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll get back to Curtain Up in just a second, but Lee, to continue on with because you're very clear in your head, and I find this interesting, that she is a bad character. She is the villain, but your film doesn't have any good characters.
No, yeah.
Any pure characters.
Yeah.
I don't think it has any pure villains either. That is my read. And I think one of the things that it does have in common with Curtain Up is that it does look not just at individuals, but there's a family context there.
Yeah.
That comes into the story. This idea that she's a bad person, I find interesting, because I think if you look at her character in context, never mind. I'm just digging myself a big hole here, and I work in academia.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask this question for both of you. Were you very conscious when you were starting out with your projects of how these characters or these real life people might be perceived, what people might be used to seeing, and how what you show in the film might be a little bit different than what people expect? So I'll start again with Lee, and then I'll go to Kelly and Hui.
Yeah, I think when you're making a story about an Asian lead, if it's in English, if it's meant to be shown in the West, like Canada or America, you already have a pretty good idea of what audiences are expecting. And so you kind of have a nice jumping off point in terms of subversing whatever expectations, if you want to subvert expectations, which I did. And I think Curtain Up, I'm guessing you did as well. So yeah, I was very conscious of how especially like a young Asian girl would be perceived on screen. And I think that, you know, what I thought was interesting was that if you look at movies that Hollywood has made, like the young, pretty Asian girl has been one of two things, which is either has been very like innocent and angelic, or like super, super dangerous and violent at times. So I thought that was a really interesting dichotomy. And so how the movie works, what I was trying to do was at the beginning, you don't know whether she's guilty or not. And so the audience has to sort of choose for themselves which stereotype they want to go with. Is she like young and innocent and naive, or is she like really ruthless and maniacal? And
Right.
throughout the movie, I tried to make it very unclear, or not unclear, but ambiguous, I suppose, and to suggest that perhaps she's like both those things at the same time. That you're not to be a full complex human, you can be two different sorts of things at the same time, which I think we all are.
Right. Okay. I want to come back to you and ask you about audience reactions
Sure.
to that approach. But going back to Curtain Up, if you can talk a little bit about what you had in mind when you were presenting this story and showing these kids and their families when you started out, and how conscious you were of these expectations that people might have of the community. That would be great if you could share a little bit about that.
Right. I was gonna say, like, I really agree with Dong when he said, like, there's definitely certain kind of presumption or expectations from people, like especially mainstream audiences, on what kind of community that is. Because when I was, because casting is a big part of our documentary making, right? We have a group of like over 30 kids to choose from, in a theater club. And when we were like actually working on choosing the children, actually our professors at the journalism school were talking to us and suggesting a lot about like, oh, what were the parents doing? Like, are they from like restaurants or hair salons or all these like typical Chinatown places, right? And they thought like, oh, if they're from those places, then their families might be more interesting to explore. You know what I mean? Like they're hardworking, like from kind of like lower class or like, hardworking people. And in our casting process, we did find out that some of their parents are from those places, right? But I mean, that doesn't mean they're more interesting people or they naturally tell like better stories, right? Because I mean, if people think Chinatown is like such a place, then I think we do have this idea in mind that it's now even Chinatown or even the Chinatown school is now this monolithic environment where all children are just from poor families working in hair salons or blah blah blah. So actually, in our casting, we do have like a lot of diversity among the families. Some of the families are like working class. Some of the families are like their parents are bankers, or some of the families are like even born and raised in Western country. Actually, Jack's family are born and raised in Australia, and they're doing music. They're like musicians in the US.
Yeah.
So I think we were kind of intentionally trying to show this diversity that even in Chinatown, like it's not really as you or the mainstream audiences expect. It's not just restaurant people or hair salon people.
Right. It's the bankers as well that you mentioned earlier, right. I think. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Kelly?
Yeah,
Any
I mean,
comments?
I think what was also helpful for us in our process of the production is that the kids themselves, I guess we found out that this stereotypes and issues actually feature really prominently. I mean, even though they're like 10 or 11 years old, they actually think about it a lot. And what was helpful for us is quite a few of them, like they were actively countering the stereotypes. So I mean, I think I agree with like both the guys that like there is some sort of like responsibility as filmmakers, right? As much as I mean, in a documentary, you want to tell the story as it is, but then you don't really also want to perpetuate some of these stereotypes. And I think what was helpful for us is the kids themselves. Like again, like William especially was like actively, sort of like countering and questioning some of these stereotypes himself in a way that it's, I guess, pretty innocuous, as an 11-year-old. So I think that was really, I think we really appreciated that, like, in our storyboarding and
Okay, thank you. So in terms of audience, I'll go back to you and ask you, when you've screened the film in other settings before, how have people reacted to the particular characters and stories? Have they have they been surprised? Have they been drawn to particular or identified with particular characters? And also, sorry, this is a sort of 2-point question. Has there been, is the film received differently when you show it to a quote unquote mainstream audience versus an Asian audience?
Or COVID kind of hit, unfortunately. But my one big screening was in Napa, which I don't know if you know anything about Napa in California, but it's like a very white town. It was a lovely film festival. I'm so glad they invited me, but it was very white, and they liked the movie and they had certain thoughts about it. But I will say that I have watched it with some Asian friends, and there's like one joke in there that I think is the funniest joke in the movie. My Asian friends thought it was really funny, but the Napa audience did not really like. So I do think if I got a chance to show it to an Asian audience, they would laugh at different parts and they would think differently of the main character and their motivations. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, the reactions have been very different, and it's been surprising to see, specifically again with the white audience that I was able to show it to, how they interpreted. I try not to say anything about the movie, but how they basically had there's a main antagonist in the movie who is a white character, and I will say that the white audiences were much more sympathetic to him in the end than I had expected, and that I felt that they had more sympathy for him than I did, and they, even though April, the Chinese character, is the protagonist of the movie, it still felt like the white audiences had a harder time relating to her, for whatever reason. So, but they still like the movie. So
okay, great. I want to come back to that character again and people's reactions. But in terms of Curtain Up, have you noticed any particular patterns in terms of how people react to the film in certain screenings? Yeah, in terms of what the kind of story that you're presenting. Kelly or
I think, yeah, I think because there are like different aspects in our film that people can take away, right? So actually, I do feel like, because we've shown the film to like Asian American people, to the white, like kind of more mainstream people, and I even showed that to some Chinese audience, like back in China last year, like with a rough cut. So I do find it very interesting that different people really grab different aspects. For example, like Asian American people, especially Chinese American people, they do resonate a lot with this tension, right? Like societal versus familial, kind of like pulling forces, on different directions. And it's kind of interesting that kind of white audiences focus more on kind of the transnational aspect of this film. Like, for example, like if you remember, like William's mom sent him back to China for a military training camp. Yes. And I think a lot of people are actually quite interested in that part, like kind of like how tough and how like disciplined was the military camp in China, and was that gonna kind of traumatize William, as an American kid, like is it gonna be bad for him? And also, I think I remember clearly that there's a very curious question from a white audience asking like about like, oh, is the musical super popular among Chinese now? Like Chinese, not like Chinese American. So I'm thinking about this because like when the white audiences see the film, when they see a group of Chinese kids, they think they must like Chinese, right? They think about like, oh, how are they doing in China? Or are they from China? Or like blah, 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 all these like transnational or like China things. Yes. So that, in a sense, also shows how kind of difficult Asian Americans or Chinese Americans are being accepted as Americans in the US, right? When they're seen on screen, they're still being seen as like the perpetual foreigners, as as the term says. But the Chinese audience are also interested in this film because they want to know how the Chinese American communities are living, or how the Chinese communities are living in a Western country, right? That's like a totally different perspectives. But yeah, that's kind of like some interesting observation from the audiences.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I have a question. Like, did the Chinese audiences think that like these Chinese American kids were like doing something crazy? Like, this is the dumbest thing you could possibly be doing. Go to a theater school to sing and dance. Like, are you insane? Is that what they thought? I'm just curious.
Right. I don't really think so. I think most of them are very jealous of how happy and how like the thing is, okay, in the film I think there's a very interesting thing when William and I think Charlotte also talked about this, because all their parents are watching Chinese TV series, TV dramas at home, and it's all like Chinese actors, right? So it's taken for granted that Chinese TV shows are played by Chinese actors.
Yeah.
But for this kids, they're very confused because like their parents are telling them that Chinese or Asian people are very difficult for Asian people to do acting.
Yeah.
In the US. But why are we seeing all these Chinese actors on the TV screen? So I guess that's also how this transnational context plays into their kind of like psychology or how they perceive themselves. Right. So to answer your question, though, is like I think in China people take it for granted because there need to be actors.
Yeah, there have to be actors in China.
There have to be actors. So Chinese people are not minority in China, right?
Yeah, right.
So they don't need to worry about this. But when you move that context into a different context, being Asian Americans in the US, then the whole story changed, and there's a lot of confusion about that.
Yeah. I was really jealous of those kids, so I understand as well that sense of I wish I was allowed to do what I wanted to do as a kid, but I got to do it later. So.
But you're doing filmmaking, right?
Yeah,
right
I'm okay now. I'm all right now. Yeah.
You're not there.
Yeah. You're there.
Let's just pick up on that point about filmmaking, since you raised it amongst yourselves. So, Lee, you trained as a lawyer. Kelly, you're a journalist. And Hui, you are an author. But did you always intend to become a filmmaker, and how were there any expectations placed on you in terms of whether this was a smart thing to pursue or a valuable thing to pursue?
Okay, I was supposed to be a doctor, and my mom's a doctor, so I pretty much failed the MCAT. I failed all the organic chemistry section, so I couldn't become a doctor. It was very unsafe. So then I went to law school, and I barely graduated law school. And you don't want me as a lawyer. It's also very unsafe for your personal health. So I literally can't do anything. I can't do engineering either.
Okay.
So I really ran out of choices. So I kind of had to become a filmmaker.
The default? Okay.
Yeah, by default. I discovered it in law school, actually. I just made little videos, and I thought that I was pretty good at it. And then I got into Werner Herzog's film school, which gave me a lot of self-confidence about pursuing it. That's how I ended up in this direction. I don't know about everyone else. It sounds like you guys are both good at your other jobs, and this isn't the last thing that you have to do. But yeah, that's me.
Hui, you've been making documentaries and short films for a while, though. Is this something that you wanted to pursue from a young age, and were you supported to do that?
Right. I mean, I first I have to say, like, I'm first and foremost a filmmaker and then an author. Like, I just kind of like transition a little bit to writing, but writing is kind of my part-time, but like filmmaking is like my main thing. To be honest, I feel like because I finished high school in Beijing before coming to US for college, and I was actually in a very, very math and science dominated and oriented high school. It's basically like everyone is doing all the math competitions and science competitions, stuff like that. So I feel like my first motivation to do filmmaking was I wanted to be different from them. Like I wanted kind of a self-selected minority among like all the like my classmates. So I was lucky enough to be very supported by my family and all my friends. I think a lot of my friends are like, I don't know, like, but I'm from Beijing, so this only speaks to Beijing. Like we are kind of like, I think in China, people know that there are certain dreams, like filmmaking is kind of like this artistic pursuit, right? But most of the people still choose to do kind of more stable jobs, or like the jobs that give them definitely much more money, more easier. So I guess many of our friends are very, they appreciate my choice, but they themselves won't do it. That's kind of basically it. Like a lot of them definitely have pressures from their families. And that also relates to like what I'm writing about, like the overseas Chinese students here in the US, because technically speaking, if you want to stay in the US, find a good job, then it's definitely much easier to choose a STEM project. Like 95% of my classmates, like I went to Cornell for college, and 95% of like Chinese students there were doing engineers or like finance. That's the easiest way for you to stay in the US. And I was actually writing about this. I think it's also how the system of the US immigration is designed, that they want you to be like engineers, doctors, or finance people, because it's like stable job, give you good life, and you don't like, you just safe here in the US. You don't like speak out all the time. You don't make like, you know, dangerous arts to the mainstream society. So I was trying to say, like, even among the overseas Chinese students, like among the new immigrants here in the US, there's a certain kind of like new model minority class forming, because everyone is doing engineers and doing you know, finance consciously, you know, because they want to have a good life here. So yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. Maybe I will, because there are a couple of questions in the chat, and I want to make sure that people feel like they have the opportunity to ask questions of the panel. I'm going to ask a question to Hui and Kelly from Susan, who says that due to the film, do you feel that Chinese American parents are more willing to allow their children to explore acting?
If my mom saw your movie, she'd be like, "Yo, don't be like these kids. They'll all be failures. I promise you." Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think it would be great if our film had that much of an impact that, you know, that, yeah, parents would be more willing to allow their children to explore acting. But I guess what the documentary sort of showed is that there isn't exactly like an answer per se, that even in the documentary, the parents themselves was kind of like still navigating this question of whether, you know, this is something that's worth pursuing, whether full-time professionally, or like it's just like a side, like a hobby kind of thing. And you've like parents who, I guess outrightly in the sit-down interviews, say that this is not really something that you know, can earn you the money to feed your family, but then at the same time are looking for opportunities for their children to continue doing it because they know that they love it. So I think there isn't really like a very clean answer to that. Yeah, that's what I think.
Okay, so it depends. Go
yeah,
ahead.
there's a small anecdote to this. I think I remember very clearly from Charlotte's mom, when we talk about like whether she wants Charlotte to be an actress in the future, and she was like, I always tell her, if you want to be an actress, go back to China. There you will have comparative advantage to other like future actresses, but here is like even harder for you. So I think that's kind of very interesting to think about. You know, it also comes back to my kind of like transnational context of this. Like if they feel like it's very hard for them to be in the US, be an actor, maybe, you know, there's another way there back in their home country. So yeah, and maybe that's some way out.
Because they're not racialized in the same way if they're in China, and they're not necessarily a minority there, but also maybe the industry is different and opportunities are different. Yeah, so for all of those things, I do want to go back and ask you about Charlotte in a second, but I have a question for Lee as well. That's actually from Barb Lee, and she says, or she asks, have you had pushback from the Asian community for showing a bad Asian character in the university setting? As this is a sore point for Asians and non-Asians.
Well, so I will answer that question, but I just wanted to bring back something that I've been thinking about ever since Hui said it, which I thought was so insightful, and I didn't think about it until this moment, which was, if we're talking about the model minority myth, I never had to come to North America as an adult, as my mom did. And so Hoy had the perspective of like, it's easier to stay in America if you have a visa or some sort of immigration thing for the STEM careers. So, and I was like, oh wow, if they structured the immigration so that it's easier to let in people with that background, then of course their children are gonna grow up to probably have the same background. And then if American filmmakers are seeing all these Asians with only a certain background, then that's why the model minority myth kind of shows itself in cinema, because the immigration was set up so that only those types of Asian people were let in, or it's easier for them to let in. Anyways, just Hui mentioned that, and I thought that was really interesting, and I never thought about it. With respect to the bad Asian characters in the university, she's not a bad character. She's good at what she does. She's just a very bad. She's a bad person. I don't know. I think we need. I haven't really had that much pushback. I've had some Asian people come up to me and be like, "I'm glad that you finally showed someone who's like not a perfect person and does not behave ethically and nicely and politely." So I've had some of that. No, I haven't really had any pushback yet. But if they do, they're welcome to make their own movie, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, there is another question, and it is slightly related to the one I've just asked. So Pratik asks of all of you, actually, do we need more dark crime films with Asian characters derived from real stories? Recently, India has been releasing many crime shows with lovable villains, and they're doing well on Netflix globally. So, Kelly, do you have any plans to make any
a dark crime film?
Yeah.
I guess. Well, I mean, I think that I kind of like agree with the second part of the question, that we like need more films derived from real stories. I mean, I think the whole thing that everyone touched about is that Asian people should not be sort of like typecast into this like superhero sidekick, like a nerdy best friend kind of thing. And it's a lot more complex than that. Because like, as with any community groups, we are not all the same. And I think that's important for like film and TV to kind of like show that. So if that means like making more dark crime films, I think by all means. But I think the whole point is that we shouldn't be sort of like looking at a particular type of Asian character and particular type subgenre of like Asian films only. And yeah, I think
Okay. Any other thoughts, Hui? Did you want to add something?
Dark crime films made me think about, all these like Fu Manchu or Charlie Chan films, like back in 1920s, right? Like when the Yellow Peril was like dominant, like the dominant discourse among the, the Hollywood representation or the mainstream representation. The thing, I think we need all kinds of films, right?
Yes.
With Asian characters. The thing is now we have the power to tell our own stories. So I guess the problem with Fu Manchu or Charlie Chan is, to be honest, like, I mean, they were derived from like certain main characters, like real people. Like there are kind of like Asian gangsters or like people like that. But the thing is, those characters are not created by the Asian communities themselves, right? They're not like authentically Asian stories. So I guess it's definitely a very interesting good thing to show in the film. I'm not personally a very dark person, so I won't. I cannot tell dark crime films well, so I won't do that. But like I'm looking forward to seeing more films like that. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I personally am a very dark person, so yeah, I would like to see most of this stuff. But well, the answer to that question is those TV shows and movies do exist. They're just in Chinese right now, and people generally don't like to read subtitles. I mean, there's a lot of great dark crime Chinese movies, like Infernal Affairs. I mean, that's an old example, but yeah, they do exist. So I don't know what. Perhaps the question is asking, like, how do we do that, and how do we make these dark crime, dark Asian stories, but in English? And that's going to be really tricky, because then what do? Are you going to do a Chinese story set in China, but everyone's speaking English? That's too strange, right? But if you want to do an Asian story set in North America, then it has to have sort of an immigrant angle, and it's just a tricky situation to navigate. But yeah, in terms of just if you want dark stories, dark Asian stories, then you just have to go back to their native language, and you have a deep well of content that you can watch there, and hopefully more show up on Netflix, and make it big globally, like these lovable villains from India, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. I do have another question from Amy for everybody. Would it be nice to see shows where the character can be Asian or not? Like Sandra Oh's character on Killing Eve, how can this be done? So a character, I guess, that is not written or envisioned as specifically Asian, but is played by an Asian actor.
I think they've had a few. Aside from Sandra Oh's character in Killing Eve, I believe John Cho's character in that like missing daughter movie, Searching, was also, it could have been a white character or Asian character, and I think their Asianness is not really brought up in the movie at all, which leads me to believe that it could have been written for any race essentially. Yeah, it would be really nice to see those, but I don't. I'm not sure the exact mechanism in which you can get more of them on screen, because unfortunately, if you do work with producers, traditionally white producers or through the studio system, and they have an option to make a main character Asian or not Asian, they're probably going to make them white. So, yeah.
Okay. There's one more question from Barb, but I want to, I did have a question about Charlotte, but going back to Curtain Up for a moment, and I've just completely lost where I was going with that question. So I will go back to Charlotte in the documentary, and her journey in the film is quite interesting. At the beginning, the way in which she expresses herself is a bit unsure. She's sitting with her brother, who is quite clear about, has a very clear idea about how she should behave and what he should do as a older brother. But how did, in your observation, how did gender expectations as well as expectations based on, race or ethnicity factor into the way the story unfolded and how you chose to present things in the documentary?
Okay, I think for Charlotte, I actually felt like maybe the family piece was pretty poignant, because as you mentioned, I think you can see in all these interviews with both her and her brother that she's sort of like, in a way, like living in the shadow of her brother. He was like this really successful kid in the theater club, and she had all these expectations kind of like put on her, maybe even by herself, that she wants to she feels like she can't really ever live up to them. And you can see how she's really influenced by both like her mom and her brother's opinions of what character she should be, and things like that. And I think the fact that she landed Elsa, not just because it's the lead role in Frozen, but also because the Elsa character herself, had also to confront some of these fears and then sort of like come out of them. And I think it kind of like was parallels like Charlotte's own journey in real life of like coming into her own, and like and through the process of filming this, I guess we kind of like saw that growth in her, like that sort of like a journey. But at least at the end of this documentary, I guess it has changed, like for now, but you still see a little bit of that uncertain Charlotte in her during her transition to middle school, and like saying that it's so hard to be like the only Asian in her class, in her friend group, something like that. So that part of her still remains. Yeah.
Yes. Hui, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, a little bit, behind the scene, because like we were filming, it still goes back to casting, right? Because I mean, in the first few months into the filming, we were like basically William was like a no-brain choice for us because William was such an outgoing and very personable kid. But we were filming quite a few kids, and even after Charlotte got the role of Elsa, we didn't really set to have her as a main character. It was like in the middle of their rehearsal for Frozen that we thought, okay, in terms of filmmaking, right, we need this character not only to balance, because before we decided to have Charlotte, we were actually focusing on 3 boys. Basically, like that at that time. And then we were thinking like, no, we need Charlotte to be our main character, not only because we want to balance the gender, but also, the story is about Frozen, about a girl like empowering themselves, right? Empowering herself. And Charlotte was such a good character to represent in this documentary. So yeah, it was the filmmaking process that we had. And I feel like, to be honest, because I had a lot of conversation with Charlotte's mom, even after the production of this film, and it was quite obvious that because of the success of her brother, even like her mom was like, also her brother is like, older, right? So, and her mom really had a lot of like confidence and attention to her brother. Like, her brother's character, you could tell a little bit from, you could tell his character, from the interviews. And I think that has a strong influence from their mom paying more kind of like comparatively more attention to the brother, and kind of having a high hope for her brother. Her brother is wearing this like Bronx Science like high school t-shirt, and her mom was always talking about how she had a great expectation for him to be in Ivy League school in the future, blah 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 blah. But for Charlotte, it's like not that kind of much expectation. And I think Charlotte is living through all of this. And I think in our film, I mean, this is all behind the scenes story, but I think in our film we could at least show a little bit aspect of Charlotte finding herself in the rehearsals and in the Frozen production. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just before I get to Lee again on this question, Kelly, I think I forgot to ask you about filmmaking and this decision to pursue filmmaking in addition to your career as a journalist, and whether there were any expectations of you, what the reaction has been to this new practice that you have.
So yeah, I guess I should clarify that I'm not pursuing filmmaking full time, and I do have a day job as a journalist at a local newspaper, and which has been actually the bulk of my vocation. So I worked like several years as a newspaper journalist before I went to study documentary. And I guess the motivation of that is just wanting to explore new ways of telling stories. And I really feel like some stories can be told with greater depth and color through the film medium. Expectations, well, I guess so I also went to like a kind of like a math and science kind of high school, or rather like the subjects that I chose in high school was kind of that, because it was just it's kind of like you feel like you had to live up to certain expectations from family or from culture. Although in Singapore, I wouldn't call it the model minority myth, since I'm not in the minority culture, but there's still like a lot of this similar stereotypes that, you should take STEM subjects and do a respectable job, and that's how you earn a living. So, which was why I've resonated quite a bit with some of these children that we were filming. So actually, even going into journalism was not really like my parents' favorite choice of mine. But I guess there wasn't very much like pushback. I mean, they weren't like gonna like force me to go to med school or something like that. I guess it wasn't what they envisioned my life to be, but they kind of pretty much just let me make the decision at this point, which I'm thankful for. But yeah, I do identify with some of this like cultural and familiar tensions still. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. There's a question related to that, but Lee, going back to Stealing School, were you conscious of expectations also around gender when you were developing this character of April? And how has gender, how have gender roles, do you think, shaped how people have responded to the film?
I think going back to like just starting with certain presumptions from Western audiences, they just again, like I said, they tend to see young Asian women as more submissive, and so I knew that was an interesting place to start from and to build the story from a place where an audience is expecting one thing, and then slowly as the story moves on, you start to see that your expectations are unfounded or incorrect, or your stereotypes begin to become dismantled little by little as the story moves forward. I mean, I hope in some small way that by dismantling an audience's expectations of the main character throughout a movie, you can maybe help to dismantle their stereotypes and expectations in real life. I personally don't think movies have that much power. I'm just doing this because it's fun and maybe they'll pay me for it someday. But maybe in a perfect world, maybe movies can change the way that people see their own prejudices, I suppose.
Okay, thank you. We'll go back to some of those themes, but Anthony has a question for Kelly. Who do you write for, and what kind of stories do you do? I'm not sure if this is in your journalism career or in terms of filmmaking activities you might do in the future, but Kelly, over to you.
Oh, wow. So it's quite variety actually. But I've been writing for just local papers in Singapore. Before Columbia, I was like writing more on social issues, I would say, health a little bit, and some immigration related issues, but it's kind of like quite different from the context in the US, I guess, like, because in Singapore we have a lot of like migrants from South Asia, so that kind of like was the group that I was focusing on, and often, like voiceless, as with many blue-collar migrants, pretty much, I guess, in North America as well. But right now I'm actually writing for a business newspaper. So I think the content is quite different, like covering like business and finance and like disputes, especially in this like pandemic era, a lot of them coming up. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have another question for all of you from Arav. And this goes back to this, it can go back to this point about the capacity for films to make social change. What are your expectations from the upcoming Marvel movie, Shang-Chi? Do you believe it will be suitable for the Asian community as Black Panther was for the Black community? Big question. Feel free to jump in. Hui?
Right, it's a big question, but first of all, I think it's very interesting to mention that Simu Liu, the actor in Shang-Chi, he actually saw our trailer and he contacted us. He really liked our film, and we're gonna have some more conversation in the future about Curtain Up with him. So that's something to expect. But on the other hand, I feel like it is suitable. I still feel like it's just going back to films like Crazy Rich Asians or like Farewell or like even Mulan coming out this year. Like because there are still so few like Asian films by Hollywood or in the US that people pour a lot of expectations on each single one of them, and they want them to represent the whole Asian community, which is such a diverse and very, very different. Like we talked about model minority, but model minority is like the high, kind of like the middle class, like hardworking, but also there are like a lot of like refugees, right, like from Southeast Asia in the past decades. So I would say like it's just too much expectation for a single film to represent. I think Asian community is quite in a sense it's quite different from Black community. that Black community is rooted in the U.S. for a long time, and they have shared experiences, right? But for Asian community, it's just such a different, not a homogeneous community.
Yeah.
So I think I would say just in regard to every single film like Shang-Chi, I just see it as a film, as a good Marvel film that has Asian, we could be, we definitely, we can be very happy seeing people like ourselves on the big screen and be happy for those. But in terms of like the stories told or the expectations, there's definitely going to be a lot of disputes, I would say. Even before Shang-Chi, like the news came out that Simu Liu became the main character in Shang-Chi, and there's a lot of pushback in China. People are saying like, he's now looking like
he's ugly. They said he was ugly.
Yeah,
oh man, that's rough. It's hard to have an entire country call you ugly, man.
Right. or like the story of Shang-Chi isn't like a good representation of Asian story. It's always like that. So like, I guess just be more chill.
There's always something to critique. Yeah, I was just gonna say it's actually better not to have expectations, or at least like from the representation sense of it. Because like I think there's always like a subgroup of Asian people that will not be satisfied, I guess, by the way it portrays Asia. Because as you say, it's just not one type of like Asian culture, community, whatever.
Okay, and I just want to bring in a related question from Renee, who asks, when you try to tell stories that are authentic to Asian identities, are you ever mindful of whether or not the stories are relatable to non-Asian audiences? Does this affect your storytelling at all? So maybe I'll start with Lee, and then ask the two of you to jump in afterwards.
Let me see here. When you try to tell stories, yeah, I am because I think I'm just a little too focused on how I'm gonna actually make a career in filmmaking, and so if I need to do that, especially here in Canada, I kind of have to connect with white audiences because they're mostly white people. So I probably think about this a little too much, and not. If I was a true artist, I would only care about expressing myself the best way possible, but I'm not. I'm a capitalist, so I kind of need to think about how audiences are going to connect to my movie, and that's actually why, in my movie it's about an Asian girl, but there's a lot of white characters, and not all of them are good, but there are some like nice white characters, so that if you're an older white person, you're like, oh, that person's nice, I relate to that person, so that they can still come away with like a good feeling from the movie, as opposed, because I don't think it's very profitable to alienate an entire group of people. So yeah, I have to be very mindful of my audience, essentially. Also, I kind of wanted to answer the Shang-Chi question a little bit. I agree with the way that we should not have high expectations of it, and also the way that the question is framed, I'm not sure what they think about the Asian community is, right? Because if you want to say, because it goes back to Asian community not being a monolith, is it going to make Asian Americans happy, or is it going to make Asians in China happy? Because if you have to think of those two things in different contexts, because Crazy Rich Asians is the movie that we hold up as a good example, but who hated Crazy Rich Asians? Asians actually living in China. They did not like the movie at all. I'm guessing Kelly, the Singaporeans, did not. Yeah, I'm guessing they did not love the portrayal of their culture as materialistic, heartless assholes. But yeah, so it's like, was Crazy Rich Asians good for Asians? I don't know. Like, some people thought it was, but a lot of Asians in the other continent didn't. So I don't know what Shang-Chi's going to do. I think it will probably go down the route of Crazy Rich Asians, in which Asian Americans think it's a big success, but Asians in China are like, what the hell is this guy doing? Like, but hopefully maybe it'll be a worldwide success. I don't know. Who knows?
Okay, thanks. Kelly, do you have any thoughts about this question of storytelling and who the audience is? Is that something that you keep in mind when you're thinking about a project?
Yeah, I think for this film, I guess we weren't like really consciously or actively trying to make it like relatable to non-Asian audiences. Actually, when I saw the question, my first thought was, is that why our film, we are presenting it mostly at like Asian American or like Asian film festivals and not, more less ethnically focused kind of like film festivals?
Yes.
And I think I really only have this film to sort of like share my experience from. And I think we weren't like extra conscious of whether this would be representative or it would resonate with a non-Asian audience. I don't know what Hui thinks.
Yeah, it is a quagmire for me. I just for Kelly in a sense that to be honest, to be very honest, I was a little bit frustrated after the post-production that I found out, because I don't think we were consciously making this to be Asian or to be non-Asian. We're just expressing ourselves, right? It's just a story that's relatable to ourselves. But in terms of like, because maybe I'm young, I'm still not a capitalist enough person, but because I think because maybe Kelly and I were from Asian countries and we were like not consciously, we didn't like we were not used to like catering to like mainstream audiences. But at the end of the day, we found out that this is seen as an Asian American story. This is seen as an Asian story. That's when I don't know what was it for Kelly, but that's when I realized that I was seen as an ethnic person in the US. Right. Although I didn't feel like that like in my past 23, 24 years of my life. You know what I mean? Like, so that's kind of a certain kind of frustration for me. That's also part of the reason that why I chose to be back in China now for a while. Kind of explore, because here I do feel like I'm just telling my own story and the people will be accepting my own story because I'm not seen as a different person. But I think that's still a problem in the US or in North America that we're seeing. The thing is, like, is there a pressure for you, for us, like creators or filmmakers, that if you are seen as an ethnic person or ethnic community, what kind of stories do we tell? As going back to my the first question I answered, I think there are a lot of people who consciously try to tell like mainstream Western stories. Like Margaret Lee in our film, she is actually in the Western theater scene. She's consciously trying to push her way up, as herself said, in the Western theater world, and she knows that, right? But she's taking advantage of that. I really appreciate that. But that kind of story, like her story, would have a lot of disputes among Asian communities, because many in the Asian communities would think that, why don't you tell our own stories, right? So there's always those two aspects of storytelling, and it's your personal choice, I guess, at the end of the day.
Yes. So yeah, there's a certain burden of representation that is put on filmmakers or creative people in a Western context, that they don't necessarily have to shoulder if they're not racialized, right? If they're telling stories in Asia. Okay, so I've just got a note saying we have a little less than 10 minutes. So I know Barb had an earlier question, but maybe I'll ask you, in addition to more films being made, which will lead to more representations and diverse representations, is the model minority myth still something that creative people need to be actively pushing against? What are the ways to respond to that issue other than opening up the industry as a whole? Are there any thoughts that you have on that question? Big question.
Yeah.
I think the model minority myth, or how it's portrayed on screen, is just a function of the fact that there are not a lot of Asian creators or creatives in powerful positions. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to make someone a side character or supporting character, then they are always never as developed as the main character. And the only way you get an Asian in the main character spot is if you have Asians in powerful executive positions or directors or producers or whatever. As soon as you're able to put more Asians in those powerful positions and make more Asian protagonists, then you'll start to naturally disassemble the model minority myth, because it's very difficult, or you should not be able to have a one-dimensional main character. Every main character should be complex and, you know, have urges and characteristics that seem very human and full, and show the full spectrum of human experience. The model minority myth, as it is portrayed on screen right now, comes from the fact that they're not given that space to express themselves fully. They can only express part of themselves, and unfortunately, the part that they choose to express is, you know, meek, submissive, good at school and whatnot. So I think if you just get more, even, you know, in their documentary where you make Asians the focus, you're going to get more a broader spectrum of what an Asian person can be. Yes.
Right. Yes. Absolutely. So more participation in the industry overall, behind the camera, in terms of decision making about projects. Kelly and Hui, anything to add to that?
I think I'm actually maybe like slightly like a bit more optimistic about, like, I think that, yeah, we actually are seeing more TV shows or like theater plays as well, where there is more Asians being casted. There are more Asians being casted, not just one like token Asian as like the best friend, superhero, sidekick, whatever. And I think that does count for something. And like, yeah, Crazy Rich Asians, for like all the criticism that I guess it has received in Asian countries, which I agree with. But I do think that the, you know, it being a Hollywood film and like a majority Asian cast does count for something. And hopefully this all shows that like we are moving more toward greater diversity and representation, where, I mean, I think for me personally, I kind of like look forward to coming to a space where it's not just like representation for representation's sake, but like that characters are just can stand on their own and just be interesting, just like anyone else, and not just because like we look different and that we can like be an Asian model minority stereotype, but like we are just interesting on our own.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Hui, go ahead. And sorry, before you respond, I'm getting the wrap things up message. So if you could respond to that question, but also for all of you, could you just, I'll do one more quick round, talk about anything, any other projects that you're working on, things that we can look forward to from you. And Hui, go ahead and
sure. So shall I also talk about my next project maybe?
Yes, please.
At the end? Okay.
Yes.
No problem. So in response to what both of you said, I really agree with what you said. And I'm also thinking that in terms of storytelling, is like, I think politically speaking, it's very good to have this minority mindset of like wanting, like fighting for our rights, and, you know, as a, you know, kind of like in solidarity with all the minority groups. But in terms of storytelling, I think one thing I really appreciate about Crazy Rich Asians, all these new films about Asians, are like, we don't tell stories in terms of minorities, right? This is our own story. We're not catering to any mainstream audiences. And I think it's, as long as most of the Asian people are telling stories like that, like it's just our stories. We're not telling these stories to, you know, to other types of people, or, you know, we're the majority, we're ourselves, right? Like, I think it's kind of like very hard, but also very useful to get rid of this like minority complex, or in a way like psychology, in order to tell fuller stories. Because I've seen a lot of stories told by Asians, but I can tell that they were trying to portray themselves as like this victims of the system, or like we're minorities, and it's like a little bit whiny in a sense. And that will be a cycle that puts you forever at a minority position in a way. So I really appreciate when there are more stories like Crazy Rich Asians or Farewell coming out. So for me, I just came back. I'm still in my quarantine hotel, so I just came back to China because I have a few ideas, documentary filmmaking in China. But I just finished a book on identity. It's told from both perspectives, from Asian Americans and Chinese, like mainland Chinese, about how our identities, being Chinese or being Asians, are formed historically. But also, it's a history and cultural analysis book, and it's written in Chinese. I'm kind of writing it for Chinese audience, Chinese readers. So hopefully it will come out soon. Yeah, but I just sent it to publishers. So
yeah. Okay. Thanks. So Lee and Kelly, final say on projects that you might have in the pipe?
Yeah, Hui, you should watch my movie. My main character is not a victim, so that's just right there for you. Anyways, I'm writing a few other scripts right now, but none of them are very good right now. So I have nothing to talk about my new project. But I guess if anyone's watching, you should try to support your local. If you live in a big city, you probably have a local Asian film festival, such as Vancouver Asian Film Festival. I know it might not seem like a big thing, but like I know that supporting institutions such as VAF is actually very helpful to getting more representation content, because the career trajectory for a lot of Asian filmmakers has to go through, you know, these sorts of pathways, and the more support that they have, the more likely we are of success in the long run. So yeah, I guess just buy more movies from VAF or whatnot. You don't have to watch it; just like buy it and then just have it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kelly.
Okay, yeah, so I'm back in Singapore, and I guess probably going to be based here for the next couple of years. As I mentioned earlier, working at a local newspaper, and I guess still hoping to pursue documentary filmmaking on the side. I'm actually working on a next film with a few friends. Not really related to representation, but we are documenting a family that's grappling with young onset dementia. And because it's a friend of a friend, it's kind of like a personal story to tell, and like challenging in that sense. But yeah, looking forward to it.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Good luck with all of your projects or your ideas for Lee. Thank you again for being so willing to share in this panel. And for anybody who hasn't yet had a chance to see the films, I believe there's one more day left.
One more day.
Please do check out Curtain Up and Stealing School, and support the filmmakers and the festival. And before this wraps up, I just want to turn to Barb, who has got something to announce in terms of upcoming events. But thank you all very much. Thank you to the audience. And thank you to VAF for organizing. Barb, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you all for this great discussion today. I loved both your films, and yes, Lee, as Lee said, support festivals like VAF. We really are a community that needs to support each other and support our artists and our filmmakers. So what I wanted to say very briefly is that Elimin8Hate is not done after this festival. We are continuing on. We have two workshops. It is the anti-Asian racism workshops, and I think there's posters going to come up. The first session is coming November 20th, and that is for Asian identifying participants who want to become facilitators and mobilizers and want to work in combating anti-Asian racism, which means you want to learn the tools and be empowered to go out and run other workshops in organizations, in institutions that are looking for people who have this knowledge. So we're trying to bring together all the community partners and come together with a common way to come up with actionable items so that we can address anti-Asian racism. So again, the first one is November 20th for Asian identifying participants, and then we have one that's open to everybody December 4th. So please look out for that and sign up. It is free, it is all day. We do ask people to complete pre-surveys and exit surveys because we got support from the Canadian Heritage and from SFU to put on these pilot workshops. So we really hope that people can come and we all collaborate together to come up with something really great to help our community. Thank you, and thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sue-Ann, for a great job moderating this panel. And we still have a few more films and a couple more filmmakers Q&As coming up tonight. Right after this, and then tonight as well. So thank you.